wonderful that in Egypt, when they performed these wonders, when the waters were turned into blood, when the people were smitten with disease and covered with the horrible animals, isn't it wonderful that it had no influence on them? Do you know why all these miracles didn't affect the Egyptians? They were there at the time. Isn't it wonderful, too, that the Jews who had been brought from bondage, had followed a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, who had been miraculously fed, and for whose benefit water had leaked from the rocks and followed them up and down hill through all their journeying? Isn't it wonderful, when they had seen the earth open and their companions swallowed, when they had seen God himself write in robes of flame from Sinai's crags, when they had seen him talking face to face with Moses, isn't it a little wonderful that he had no more influence over them? They were there at the time, and that is the reason they didn't mind it. They were there. And yet, with all these miracles, this God could not prevent polygamy and slavery. Was there no room on the 2 tables of stone to put 2 more commandments? Better have written them on the back then. Better have left the others all off and put these 2 on. Man shall not enslave his brother. You shall not live on unpaid labor. And the one man shall have the one wife. If these 2 had been written and the other 10 left off, it would have been 1,000 times better for this world. But they say God works gradually. No hurry about it. He is not gradual about keeping Sunday, because if he met a man picking up sticks, he killed him. But in other things he is gradual. Suppose we wanted now to break certain cannibals of eating missionaries, wanted to stop them from eating them raw. Of course, we would not tell them in the first place it was wrong. That would not do. We would induce them to cook them. That would be the first step toward civilization. We would have them stew them. We would not say it is wrong to eat missionary, but it is wrong to eat missionary raw. Then, after they began stewing them, we would put in a little mutton, not enough to excite suspicion, but just a little, and so day by day we would put in a little more mutton and a little less missionary, until in about what the Bible calls the fullness of time, we would have clear mutton and no missionary. That is God's way. The next great charge against me is that I have disgraced my parents by expressing my honest thoughts. No man can disgrace his parents that way. I want my children to express their real opinions, whether they agree with mine or not. I want my children to find out more than I have found, and I would be gratified to have them discover the errors I have made. And if my father and mother were still alive, I feel and know that I am pursuing a course of which they would approve. I am true to my manhood. But think of it. Suppose the father of Dr. Talmage had been a Methodist and his mother an infidel. Then what? Would he have to disgrace them both to be a Presbyterian? The disciples of Christ, according to this doctrine, disgraced their parents. The founder of every new religion, according to this doctrine, was a disgrace to his father and mother. Now there must have been a time when a Talmage was not a Presbyterian, and the one that left something else to join that church disgraced his father and mother. Why, if this doctrine be true, do they send missionaries to other lands and ask those people to disgrace their parents? If this doctrine be true, nobody has religious liberty except foundlings, and it should be written over every foundling hospital, Home for Religious Liberty. It won't do. What is the next thing I have said? I have taken the high ground, and I take it again today, that the Bible has only words of humiliation for woman. The Bible treats woman as the slave, the serf of man, and wherever that book is believed in thoroughly, woman is a slave. It is the infidelity in the church that gives her what liberty she has today. Oh, but, says the gentleman, think of the heroines in the Bible. How could a book be opposed to woman which has pictured such heroines? Well, that is a good argument. Let's answer it. Who are the heroines? He tells us the first is Esther. Who was she? Esther is a very peculiar book, and the story is about this. Ahasuerus was a king. His wife's name was Vashti. She didn't please him. He divorced her and advertised for another. A gentleman by the name of Mordecai had a good-looking niece, and he took her to market. Her name was Esther. I don't feel like reading the whole of the second chapter. It is sufficient to say she was selected. After a time there was a gentleman by the name of Haman, who, I should think, was in the cabinet, according to the story, and this man Mordecai began to put on considerable style because his niece was the king's wife. And he would not bow, or he would not rise, or he would not meet this gentleman with marks of distinguished consideration. So he made up his mind to have him hung. Then they got out an order to kill the Jews, and this Esther went to see the king. In those days they believed in the Bismarckian style of government. All power came from the king, not from the people. If anybody went to see this king without an invitation, and he failed to hold out his scepter to him, the person was killed just to preserve the dignity of the monarch. When Esther arrived, he held out the scepter, and thereupon she induced him to send out another order for the fellows who were to kill the Jews. And they killed 75,000 or 80,000 of them. And they came back and said, "Kill Haman and his 10 sons." And they hung the family up. That is all there is to the story. And yet this Esther is held up as a model of womanly grace and tenderness. And there is not a more infamous story in the literature of the world. The next heroine is Ruth. I admit that is a very pretty story. But Ruth was guilty of more things that would be deemed indiscreet than any girl in Brooklyn. That is all there is about Ruth. The next heroine is Hannah. And what do you suppose was the matter with her? She made a coat for her boy, that's all. I have known a woman make a whole suit. The next heroine was Abigail. She was the wife of Natal. King David had a few soldiers with him, and he called at the house of Natal and asked if he could not get food for his men. Abigail went down to give him something to eat, and she was very much struck with David. David evidently fancied her. Natal died within a week. I think he was poisoned. David and Abigail were married. If that had happened in Chicago, there would have been a coroner's jury and an inquest. But that is all there was to that. The next is Dorcas. She was in the New Testament. She was real good to the ministers. Those ladies have always stood well with the church. She was real good to the poor. She died one day, and you never hear of her again. Then there was that person that was raised from the dead. I would like to know from a person that had recently been raised from the dead where he was when he was wanted, what he was traveling about, and what he was engaged in. I cannot imagine a more interesting person than one that has just been raised from the dead. Lazarus comes from the tomb, and I think sometimes that there must be a mistake about it, because when they come to die again, thousands of people would say, "Why, he knows all about it." Would it not be noted if a man had 2 funerals? Now then, these are all the heroines, to show you how little they thought of woman in that day. In the days of the Old Testament, they did not even tell us when the mother of us all, Eve, died, nor where she is buried, nor anything about it. They do not even tell us where the mother of Christ sleeps, nor when she died. Never is she spoken of after the morning of the resurrection. He who descended from the cross went not to see her, and the Son had no word for the broken-hearted mother. The story is not true. I believe Christ was a great